You've heard of detoxing your body, but what of the problems in your mind? What are you supposed to do when your own thoughts turn toxic? In this week's talk, we'll give you 3 simple steps you can follow to help you maintain a healthy headspace. In the mid-1890s, the city of Niagara Falls started a project to dig a canal between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Try to connect them sort of like the Panama Canal. And they started this project, but it was a lot harder than they thought. And so after about a mile of digging, they gave up on the project and abandoned it, and instead just started throwing waste from the city, trash and stuff, into this big canal, this failed project. And for years, that's where they buried the trash around Niagara Falls. Well, in 1942, the plot of land containing this halfway dug canal was purchased by the Hooker Chemical Company because they needed a place to store all of their extra and waste from all of these things that they produced. They made different rubber products, plastic products, cosmetic products, a whole lot of things. And so they bought the land and they started storing barrels and barrels and barrels of chemical waste from their process. Over a 10.5-year span, they stored over 20,000 tons of industrial waste in metal barrels in this canal that was dug. And things were, it made a perfect spot for it. But through that period of time, the city of Niagara Falls kept growing. And this canal was right next to the middle of town. It was prime real estate. And the school district started talking to the chemical company saying, hey, that land that you have, we'd really love to have that to expand our town into. Would you sell it to us? And the chemical company, they had their lawyers talk to the school district and they said, here's the deal. We'll sell it to you for $1 with the condition that we are not responsible for anything that happens on the land after it's yours. Sounds like a little trouble and foreshadowing. School district said, deal. And so they covered up 20,000 tons of chemical waste with a layer of clay, threw some grass seed on it, and the school district built a school right over top of the canal. The playground itself was literally on top of where the clay had been packed down over the chemicals, and it was a very successful place for a while. It became a very trendy part of town to live in. Some of you may have heard of it. It's Love Canal. It's a neighborhood in Niagara Falls. You can still see it today if you're brave. So for years, people lived there. They built churches in the area. They built tons of homes in the area. But by the mid-1970s, people started to notice a problem. See, they started having a large number of birth defects. Kids were born with missing digits on their hands or an extra row of teeth. There was a large number of miscarriages. There was a much higher percentage of cancer than the national average, and all of it was happening to the people who lived in the Love Canal area. People started noticing weird things, and they started complaining to the local authorities. They said, I don't know why this black fluid keeps seeping out of the ground in my neighborhood. People started calling and they said, every time we get a big snow and it melts, bad smelling, weird colored fluid starts leaking up into my basement in my house. Do you know what this is? No joke. Literally, the kids out on the playground would go out, and when it had rained a lot, they would go and splash in puddles with chemicals that were leaching up from the ground in these puddles, and the kids were splashing in it. And eventually they figured out there's something going on under the ground here. They brought in folks to test it, and they realized that all of the hazardous cancer-causing chemicals that were buried, they weren't staying down there. They were leaching up through the groundwater up, and they were causing a ton of defects. By the time they finished moving everybody out of the area in 1981, they estimated that as many as 1 in 3 residents from the area had permanent chromosome damage to their bodies. That is rough. All right, we're starting a series talking about toxic things. Let me tell you, this is not something you want to mess with. It's potentially hazardous. We're going to talk over the next several weeks about things that are damaging, that are dangerous to your mind, to your emotional health, to your soul. And as an operational definition, let me give you this. You can write this down if you have fill in the blanks, or if you're following along on the Bible app on your phone, write this down. Something that is toxic, here's what we're talking about. It's something poisonous that causes sickness or death. Sort of like cancer-causing chemicals bubbling up in your basement. That's a problem. Okay? Toxic, something poisonous that causes sickness or death. While you write that down, let me take a minute to give a shout out to Pastor Craig Rochelle and Life Church. This series is based on a series that they did many years ago that I heard and thought, wow, this really changed my perspective. And they are awesome guys out there. They actually gave us permission to use some of their media to produce ours. So we love those guys. Thank you for that. But life is full of toxins. Now, if you live on top of a toxic dump and you learn about it, fixing it is pretty easy. Just move. Sell the house. Or maybe don't sell the house. Just get out of Dodge. Okay? If you realize that something you're eating is toxic, just eat something different. If the paint that you're painting with is toxic, pick a different paint. But sometimes it's not as easy to get away from toxic things. What do you do if the source of toxin comes from inside you? What do you do if the source of toxicity in your life is in your mind? You can't really put on a hazmat suit for the meat computer in your head. How are you supposed to get away with it? You can't get away from your own thoughts. And there are so many toxic thoughts that are floating around in people's minds. Maybe some of these are familiar to you. Psychologists have identified a lot of different areas of thoughts that harm people, ways of thinking that do damage to your emotional health and to your mental health. And so they categorize several of them. Some of these might sound familiar to you. Some of these are self-damaging or self-defeating thoughts. There are things like, I ought to. I ought to still be in a size 4. I ought to have a better retirement portfolio. I ought to keep my house cleaner. I ought to do these things. I just don't. Must be failing. Or self-defeating thoughts. What's the point then of dieting? I'm never going to get in shape. I'm never going to get ahead financially. I'm never going to have a healthy marriage. Why even try? Self-defeating thoughts. Sometimes they're thoughts that put you as the cause of everything wrong that goes on in your life. My kids are acting up. Must mean I'm a failure as a parent. He doesn't find me interesting. That must be that I'm an uninteresting, weird person. And there are all of these thoughts, self-defeating, self-damaging thoughts that people tend to think, whether they want to think them or not. And then there's another category of toxic thoughts. There are thoughts that are not unhealthy unless they get out of bounds, unless they come at the wrong time, unless they come in the wrong amount. Things like sexuality. Right? If you don't have a sex drive, that's probably a problem. It's natural to be attracted to people. But if you find yourself so fixated on sex that every coworker, Target shopper, and anime character is reduced to boobs and booty, okay? That's a problem. It's out of balance. It's not healthy. It's out of balance. He said boobs. It's out of balance. I did. From the stage. Wow. Okay? You see, this is not the church you expected. Okay? Or how about this? I've seen this happen before. Something traumatic happened in your past. Okay, maybe you were abused, and the memory, the worst memory in your mind just keeps coming back up to the surface like the filth that bubbles up in the basement. Or you had to respond to an emergency and it wasn't your fault, and everybody turned out okay, but that image where the car was spinning out of control and you didn't know if you were going to live or die, it just keeps coming back to your mind again and again and again. I used to volunteer as a chaplain with the coroner's office. Some of these guys and girls saw the most grisly deaths in person and had to investigate them that you could imagine. And they would, this is weird, they would keep pictures of some of the worst ones on their phone, and sometimes they just pull them out and just look at them again. Why would you do that? There are things that are not inherently unhealthy. Okay, things like worry. It's natural. It's good to say, I want to make sure that my son learns how to drive well so that he doesn't get in an accident. But if you, every time that he's driving, the whole time he's away, you're like, I think he might die. I think he might get hit by a drunk driver. I think this thing in my chest, it might be cancer. And this thing over here might be cancer. And my hair feels weird. It might be cancer. Okay, that's not healthy. Why do we think all of that? Why does that take up so much space in our minds? How many of you guys, anybody else, there are times when there's stuff that keeps coming to your mind. I don't want it there, but I just can't seem to keep it away. Yeah, me too. Me too. Why? Do you ever ask? Just why? Why does that come to my mind so much? Well, as I set out to prepare for this series, I'm doing two things. I'm studying from the Bible. What does God say about it? But I've also consulted with several Christian mental health professionals to ask, from your experience in counseling people with these things, what are you seeing? And so one of those people is a friend of mine named Chris Liljedahl. I talked to Chris about this and these thoughts that come up to my mind. And he said, man, let me tell you something. Here's why. We'll put Chris's, okay, this is Chris, cool guy. I like him. He's a licensed counselor, therapist. He's been doing it for about 20 plus years now. He said, here's the deal. Your mind is a constant stream of thoughts, all kinds of thoughts, weird thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts, healthy thoughts. What am I going to eat for lunch thoughts? My socks are not fitting right. I need to take off my shoe and fix my sock. Okay, all of these different thoughts. But he said the ones that gain traction in your mind, the ones that you tend to focus on, there are a few things about those thoughts. And one of those things that make you focus is things that are shocking, things that are frightening, things that are scary. Those are the things that gain the most attention in your mind because, okay, let's be honest. If you're just talking about surviving, then things that might mean you may not survive are going to get more attention. Naturally, over thousands of years of trying to not get killed by wild animals or not fall off a cliff, you think about that stuff. But those things bubble up to the surface of your mind, whether you want them or not. And what happens is you have a lot of people that have these things taking up space in your head. And it's like, I don't want to think this, but I can't stop. I don't want to think about this stuff, but I can't stop. I don't want to think that about who I am, but I can't stop. I don't want to be so negative, but I just can't stop. And as I was praying about this series, I really felt from the Lord that there are some of us that are just being harassed in our thoughts. And you feel, maybe that's you, and you feel helpless. Today is good news for you because God said you're not helpless. There's a strategy from heaven to help you to get those thoughts out of the focus of your mind so you can think healthier things. And I want to show you those today. It's an easy process. No, I take that back. It's a simple process. It's not easy, but it works. Okay, 3 different steps. You have to do all 3 or it doesn't work. You're going to want to write these things down because it's God's smarts. It's not mine. The first thing is this. If you want to get victory in your thoughts, you got to identify toxic thoughts. You have to identify the things that don't belong because not everything floating around in your head belongs there. You have to learn to identify them. Sometimes you get this weird thought in my mind. What if I formed a wedge of cheese out of foam and crafted a thing and then stuck it on my head? Okay, where does that come from? Why would I do that? You have to learn to identify when things are damaging to you. We love our Packers fans. You got to start sorting through. You have to wade into the stream of your thoughts and you have to start looking and saying, wait, is that good or bad? Is that healthy or unhealthy? And before you say, oh, Chris, that sounds like too much work. I'm already working. I'm already taking care of the kids. I'm already trying to juggle all that. I can't take more time to sort through my thoughts. You already sort through your thoughts. Okay? How many of you guys, you recognize the difference between thoughts that need to stay inside and thoughts that can be spoken outside? Anybody? Anybody know a friend who still struggles with that a little bit? Yep. The inside thoughts keep leaking out. Okay? Listen, you're used to sorting your thoughts. That's not new. But you need to start calibrating for toxic thoughts. Here's what God says. Here's why I say you need to do it. Put this up on the screen. Okay? Proverbs 4:23. It says, carefully guard your thoughts because they are the source of true life. Hey, you gotta look out for this. You have to protect what's going on inside the skull because everything in your life is connected to your thoughts. You have to guard them. You can't just leave the door open and go on your way. You have to pay attention to what comes in and out. Now, this word here, carefully, again, I said this last week about Greek. I'll say it about Hebrew. I am not an advanced Hebrew scholar, okay? But I can tell you that this word sometimes is carefully. Some English translations has it as diligently. Some has above all else or as a first priority. All of this means God is saying, hey guys, pay attention to what's going into your mind. Carefully guard your thoughts. You got to flag the toxic thoughts. So Thomas is going to help. Thomas is going to help me. Where are you sitting at, Thomas? Back here. Come on up. And I tell you what, Ethan and Isaiah, will you come and help me real quick? Real quick. Yeah. Real quick. I'll let you go right back down. Okay? Come up here. Podcast guys, I'm sorry. I'll try to describe what's happening. If you like the podcast, you need to watch the video. Even better, if you like the podcast, come check it out in person because there's some cool people here. So here's the deal. I'm going to stand in the stream of thoughts and I'm looking at all of the different thoughts. And what I have to do is I have to learn what are the things that are hurting me. Is this hurting me or is this helping me? And when I start, because many of you know, once you go down that path, you know it just gets darker and darker. You know, once you start feeling bad about the way that you look, it just gets darker and darker. Once you feel bad about how good of a job or bad of a job you've done as a spouse, darker and darker and darker. And you got to learn to identify the things that don't belong. And I can say, okay, this one's okay. This one's okay. Wait a minute. This one, that's toxic. That's hurting me. That's a thought that's out of bounds. That's a thought that doesn't belong. That's something I don't want to, thank you guys. I don't want to keep thinking of it. And you got to learn to label those things, and you have to identify toxic thoughts, but you can't stop at identifying them, okay? The next one's pretty obvious, but write this down too, okay? You have to choose to reject toxic thoughts. Get out of here, you. You just go sit down. Don't go far. I have a feeling you'll be back. You have to reject them. You have to stand in that stream of thoughts and sort through, like, okay, anybody ever go to a sporting event where you had to have a ticket, or a concert where you had to have a ticket? Okay? The guy at the front door is not just like, come on in, right? He's saying, wait a minute, let me see your ticket. Wait a minute, let me see your ID. Some of you have to be a bouncer for your mind and say, okay, yep, you come on through. Yep, you come on through. Yep. Oh, that's weird, but okay. Wait a minute. Nope, not that one. You're out. Okay. You got to do it. It's not God's job. It's your job. There's a balance in here. Let me show it to you. Okay. Put this next verse up on the screen. 2 Corinthians 10:4-5. Listen to, okay, I'm going to walk you through this balance. God says the weapons that we fight with, who's fighting? Okay, we're talking about your mind. The weapons that we fight with are not the weapons of the world. They have divine power. Now, where do you get divine power from? Okay, so there's a balance. We're fighting, but we need God's power. He said the weapons that we fight with, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Next slide. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We take captive every one of those things. We're sorting through every one. And when we find the things that don't belong, we don't just be like, I don't know. No. We do it with God's help. But so many times, And this has been me too. You have these thoughts that are tormenting you. You have these thoughts. I can't stop thinking about something terrible happening to somebody that I love. I just can't stop. We say, God help. But that's not what he said. He said, the answer is not saying, God help. The answer is saying, God, with your help, I will banish these things out of my mind. I will sort through and I will say, you don't belong. Out. It's your job. You have to be the bouncer for your thoughts. Now, as I was talking to Chris, my friend, it's weird because my name's also Chris. I'm not talking about myself in third person. Some of you guys maybe know, okay, that is like, get that thought out, okay? So I was talking to Chris Liljedahl about this. He had a great insight. All right, so when the Bible says that we take every thought and we make it captive, it's hard sometimes when you're reading an ancient text because we think of taking something captive in a modern sense and putting someone in prison and where they're fed 3 meals a day and maybe you can exercise and stuff. Okay, this was written in 1st century AD Rome. Okay, Roman Empire. Let me tell you, if you were a prisoner in those days, They dug a hole in the ground, they lined it with stones, and then they chained you to the wall, and they just forgot about you. Okay, the jailer's not coming down once a day. Hello, it's time for tea and crumpets. Let's sit and have a spot of tea, 1 lump or 2. We'll play some chess today. What's going on the inside? Oh, I'm thinking about you. Okay, there's none of that. Hey, check this out. The reason that Jesus specified, hey, if you want to be a real Christian, visit people who are in prison. Do you know why that was such a big deal? Because if nobody came to visit you in a prison back then, you might literally starve to death. You were utterly neglected. So when he says, put them in, the idea is that you're not in there to hang out. You're not in there to hang out with a thought. It's done, and then I move on. Okay? The big deal here is that we need to move on. So let me read a quote from Chris. We'll put it up on the screen. He said, quote, "It is often the very act of debating." Watch this. When it comes to thoughts you don't want, he said, it's often the very act of debating that causes a thought to gain traction. Because ultimately the fight is over focus. Write that down in your notes. The fight is over focus. So we've got these toxic thoughts. And okay, this here, again, sorry podcast folks, I have a chair here. Let's say that this represents my focus. Constant stream of thoughts. I'm going to focus on one thing at a time. Okay? And let's say that I have a toxic thought. Okay, Tommy's going to be my toxic thought here. It's just going to come and plant itself in focus. Sit down right there, okay? My mind is now focused on this thing. I don't want it here. Sorry. I don't want it here. I can't seem to get it away, okay? And here's where sometimes we go wrong. Because we say, Chris, you don't get it, man. It's not that easy. I tried to stop thinking about it. But what we tend to do is we say, hey, so help me understand. Why are you here? I mean, what does it really say about me? That you're here in my mind. Maybe I need to dig deeper and really understand like all the complexities of this thought and what is it about you that actually makes you so toxic? And I'm analyzing this thing where I'm like, hey, listen, man, I don't like the way I feel when you're here. Would you maybe like just tone it down a little bit? Or could we work out a deal with, okay? Or it's here and I'm like, I can't really deal with you right now. Okay, I got too much going in my life. I'm just going to go over here and pretend like you're not here. But the focus of my thoughts are still on this toxic idea. Listen, the fight is over focus. So don't analyze. You have this stuff to write down. Don't analyze. Don't argue. Don't avoid. Just move on. You're done, and then you've got to move on. Okay, so what's this? Better option. Hey, you don't belong. Get out. Poor Tommy. Bye. Bye, Felicia. Okay? And move on. Don't spend all of your time focusing on the thought. The fight is over focus. You got to kick it out and then move on. And there's one more piece that you have to get because some of you were like, dude, I've tried everything that you've said so far. It does not work. It's a cute idea. It doesn't work. There's one more piece, and if you don't get this piece, nothing else will fix it. You have to identify toxic thoughts. You have to reject toxic thoughts, and then write this down. You have to replace toxic thoughts with God's truth. If you don't, those thoughts will just keep coming back because your mind was not designed for a void. Your mind does not do well with a void. Anybody ever, I do this for mental and emotional health sometimes. I will go out and spend some time in meditation just with the Lord, okay? Just thinking about God. It is amazing. If you ever tried for even 60 seconds to think about nothing or to think about just one thing, it's hard. Your mind was not designed to be empty. Some of you guys, there's someone between 11 and 19 years old who lives in your house. You're like, no, you haven't met. Okay, I think that is. No, your mind was not designed to be empty. And so here's what happens if you don't replace this, all right? Here's what's going to happen. Tommy, every time I banish this thought and then I go on with my day, every time I turn around, if the chair is empty, I look and here he is. Sit down. Yeah. Here he is again. What? I thought I told you to leave. You're here again? Get out, right? You don't belong here. And then I go on with my sermon and I'm like, man, I need to make sure that did I have all of the ingredients for the meal tonight? Do I have everything for dinner? I wonder, I've been thinking maybe these pants are getting a little bit tight. Maybe these pants are getting a little bit tight and I didn't. And before you know it, the moment that you turn around, here he is again. Every time I go to do something else, if you leave your focus empty, it will be populated. And remember, the wiring in your head says if it's scary, if it's dangerous, if it's troubling, if it's unsettling, if it causes me to panic, that's the stuff that I'm going to latch onto. And if you don't pick a different thing, you're going to get the default. Anybody ever have a scenario in life where you got assigned the default and you didn't know there was a better option? How come he has butterscotch and I have vanilla? Well, you didn't pick, so we gave you vanilla. Well, I didn't know I could pick. Okay, you got to pick. So here's what happens. You have to tell this thought, get out. Okay, you don't belong. Poor Tommy. Okay, Tommy's been great. And then listen to what God says. All right, I'm going to stand right here so you don't get back in. Put this up on the screen. Okay, one more God's truth. We have this. All right, Philippians 4:7-9. This is talking about His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Okay? How many would like that part of the verse? How many of you, I want God's peace to guard my heart and mind. You bet, man. Okay. All right? So watch this. Watch this. His peace will guard your hearts and your minds. So, verse 8, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Next slide here. Okay? Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned, and then the God of peace will be with you. Everybody go, oh. Right? Bible is full of beautiful promises. Sometimes they come with instructions. I want the peace of God to guard my heart and my mind, but in order to have the God of peace with me, I have to actively fill my thoughts with His truth. So Peyton, come up. Peyton's going to help me. And Ethan, you come on up to the keyboard too. All right? So here's how this works. No matter how many times I kick this thought out, I don't want to keep looking at women this way. I don't want to keep going back to this trauma that happened to me. I don't want to keep tearing myself down. It keeps coming back and keeps coming back. Okay? It's not Chris's idea. This is God's idea. God says, you want the peace of God to guard your heart and mind? You have to fill your thoughts with His truth. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take something else. I'm going to take God's truth and I'm going to put that in my focus. I'm going to actively put that in. And here's what happens. Whenever this other thought comes to the forefront of my mind, I've already got something that I'm thinking on. The seat is already occupied. And again and again and again, I'm going to choose to put something different on the focus of my mind so that when these things that I don't want to think about keep bubbling up to the surface, there's nowhere for them to stick. Because I'm focused on truth. I'm focused on what God said about it, not what I say about it. The fight is over focus. And you've got to put different ideas, okay? You've got to put, whenever you start to think, if I can't do this as well as they can, I'm a failure. If I get a B, I'm depressed. If I can't have the house, if I can't give my wife and my family the same vacation, I'm a loser. As soon as you start to think that, you can instead say, wait a minute, if God is willing to give me grace, though I am flawed, maybe I ought to give myself a little bit of grace. And I put that in its place. When you feel that trauma that comes back again and again because of something scary, something damaging, something evil that happened to you, instead of saying, what if that happens again? I can take that memory and say, yes, but even in the darkest moment of my life, Christ was there with me. Christ was there weeping with me as I had tears, and I'm here today, and no matter what comes tomorrow, Christ said he will never leave me. And if I'm a survivor after that happened, I'm a survivor no matter what, because God is with me. Okay? Married men, check this out. Okay? Imagine if every time that scene on the show that you weren't expecting, or that you were expecting, or that person walks by, every time that you think, ooh, man, she's looking fine. What if every time that you start, okay, and that sex drive starts to drift out of the course, what if every time, as soon as you recognize that, you instead replace it with one of your favorite highlight moments from your married life? Let me ask you, if you did that, how spicy would your sex life be? Pretty awesome. Okay? But you are in control. You are air traffic control for what gets to land in your mind. Constant stream of thoughts, but you have to look, and with God's help, you have to say, you belong, you don't. You belong, you get out. Get out and move on. Thank you, guys. You can go back to your seats. Give them a hand. They did a good job. As we wrap this thought up, that's why it is so important to have God in your life. That's why being a Christian changes the equation. Because it's not just you fighting. It's not just you trying, I don't want to think about this and this hurts. I don't want to think about this. I don't want this to be on my mind. Some of you came in here truly feeling helpless. And it's a little bit intimidating to have God say, all right, it's your job to fix it. But it's also empowering for God to say, hey, I'm with you. And if you stand up to this, you will fix it. You can, a little bit at a time, little traction at a time. It's a constant daily thing. You got to repeatedly put that into process. But if you look for God's truth and you find these things, if you make reading the Bible part of your daily life, it's not just so that you can quote verses, it's so that your mind is fixated on God's truth, so that when these other things come and try to take the focus, there's not as much space. And it gets easier to recognize things that are lying about you and say, yes, I feel bad about myself right now, but when I consider how God sees me, those two things don't match. And he's the one that gets to define my value, not me. And little by little, you start taking that space back and you get a little bit healthier in your head. I meant it earlier when I said it. Some of us are just harassed. You're not helpless. But you've got to actively identify things and reject those things and then replace them. Identify, reject, replace. Identify, reject, replace. And as you do that, God will be with you. And the God of peace will guard your heart and your mind as you trust in him, and as you populate your mind with his truth. That's how it works. Hey there, just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for watching. If a friend sent you this link, it's because they believe what we talked about today is going to make a positive impact in your life. And if it did, there's probably somebody that you care about who could benefit from it. So take a minute to share this video with somebody. Post it to your timeline or send them a direct link. And if you're able, take a minute to give using the link at the bottom of the description on this video. One last thing. Maybe you feel a tug at your soul and you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual life and form a relationship with God. We've got folks here who would love to talk with you about it. So just text prayer to the number on your screen and we'll follow up with you. It's also in the description on this video in case that helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.